The transport ship docked at Throne Station with a heavy clang that echoed through the metal corridors. And Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the viewport to see her new home for the next 4 years. The Galactic Military Academy floated in the darkness of space like a small moon, its surface covered with training domes, barracks, and weapons platforms that could destroy entire fleets. And somewhere inside those walls, the greatest warriors from 200 worlds were waiting to meet the first human ever admitted to their ranks. Elena grabbed her bag and stepped into the airlock, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. And she reminded herself that she had earned this spot through blood and sweat and 4 years of training on Earth that had pushed her body to its absolute limits. She was not here as a tourist or a diplomat or a symbol of peace between species. She was here to become a soldier. The corridors of Throne Station were built for beings much larger than humans. And Elena felt like a child walking through a giant's castle as she followed the glowing signs toward the registration hall. And every alien she passed turned to stare at her with expressions she could not read. Some had scales and claws and teeth designed for tearing flesh, while others had shells like armor plating or tentacles that could crush metal, and a few had no visible features at all. Just floating shapes that hummed with strange energy. Elena kept her eyes forward and her spine straight, and reminded herself that humans had faced worse odds throughout history. Her species had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions, and they had crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars with nothing but determination and the stubborn refusal to die a little. Intimidation from aliens was not going to break her now. The registration officer was a creature called a methane breather, its body hidden inside a glass tank filled with yellow gas. And it examined her documents with what might have been surprise or disgust, or both. Human, it said through a translator box mounted on the tank. You are the first of your kind to attend this academy, and I must inform you that the dropout rate for new species is approximately 94% within the first year. Elena nodded and signed her name on the holographic screen. I understand, she said. The medical bay is on level 47. The methane breather continued. You will need to visit it frequently, as your species is remarkably fragile compared to most cadets here, and our doctors have limited experience repairing human anatomy. Thank you for the information. The creature made a sound that might have been a laugh. Good luck, human, and try not to die before orientation ends. Elena found her barracks on level 32. A long room filled with bunks designed for different body types. And she located her assigned bed in the corner near a window that looked out into endless space. She had just finished unpacking when the door slammed open and 3 cadets walked in, their footsteps heavy enough to shake the floor. The leader was enormous. He stood nearly 3 meters tall with dark green scales covering his entire body, and 4 muscular arms hung at his sides, each one ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. And his face was dominated by a wide mouth filled with 3 rows of teeth that gleamed under the artificial lights. Behind him came 2 smaller aliens of species Elena did not recognize, but they moved with the confidence of predators who had never known fear. The scaled giant stopped in front of her bunk and looked down at Elena with eyes that held nothing but contempt. So this is the human, he said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder in a cave. I am Krathful of House Vorduk, and my family has produced warriors for 18 generations who have never known defeat. Elena stood up slowly and met his gaze without flinching. I am Elena Vasquez of Earth, she said. Nice to meet you. Krathful laughed, and his companions joined him, and the sound filled the barracks with cruel amusement. Nice to meet me, he repeated. The prey animal has manners at least. But manners will not save you when the training begins, little human. Because this academy is not a place for soft creatures who bruise when you touch them. He leaned closer, and Elena could smell something like copper and smoke on his breath. My people are the Vardaki, he continued. We were conquering star systems while your species was still living in caves and painting pictures on walls. And we do not understand why the Council allowed a human to disgrace this academy with her presence. Maybe they wanted to try something new. Elena said calmly. Krathful's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might strike her right there. But instead he pulled back and made a gesture to his companions. The orientation ceremony is in 1 hour, he said. Try not to get lost on the way, little human, because no one here will come looking for you if you disappear. They left without another word, and Elena sat down on her bunk and let out a long breath. She had known this would happen. The briefings on Earth had warned her the humans were not respected in the galactic community, that most species saw them as newcomers who had stumbled into space by accident, rather than earning their place among the stars. But knowing something and experiencing, it were two different things. Elena looked out the window at the distant stars and thought about her grandmother, who had fought in 3 wars on Earth before retiring to a small farm where she grew vegetables and told stories about the battles she had survived. The universe does not care if you are big or small, her grandmother had told her once. It only cares if you are willing to keep fighting when everything tells you to give up. Elena pulled out her tablet and began reviewing the Academy Combat Manual, memorizing the sections on Vardaki physiology, their attack patterns, their weaknesses. Krathful thought she was prey. He was about to learn that humans had stopped being prey a very long time ago. The first month at the Academy taught Elena 2 important lessons that would shape everything that came after. First lesson was that Krathful was not going to leave her alone. The harassment started small, with insults whispered in corridors and laughter that followed her through the training halls. But it grew worse with each passing week, as the Vardaki cadet tested how far he could push without breaking Academy rules. Her equipment disappeared from her locker and reappeared damaged or destroyed. Her uniforms were torn and stained with substances she did not want to identify. And other cadets, who might have become her friends, received quiet warnings to stay away from the human if they valued their own safety. Vol never touched her directly because physical assault outside of sanctioned training was forbidden. But he made sure she understood that she was alone in a place where being alone could mean death. The second lesson was more useful. Elena learned that most species in the galaxy had evolved with natural weapons built into their bodies, claws and fangs and armor and venom, and they relied on these gifts so completely that they had forgotten how to fight without them. The Vardati were ambush predators who attacked in short, explosive bursts and expected their prey to die quickly. And they had never developed endurance because they had never needed it. The Cathari were fast enough to dodge laser fire, but they tired after only minutes of sustained movement and needed long rest periods to recover. The shell kinds could survive direct hits from plasma cannons, but their joints were exposed and their reflexes were slow. Beneath all that armor, every species had strengths that they considered unbeatable. Species also had weaknesses they had never bothered to address. Elena spent her nights in the Academy archive, reading everything she could find about alien combat doctrine and biological limitations. And she began to see patterns that no one else seemed to notice. She also started running every morning at 0400, hours before the other cadets woke up. Elena left her barracks and ran through the maintenance corridors that wound through Throne Station like veins through a body. And she ran until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for her to stop. Then she ran some more. Humans were not fast compared to most species, and they were not strong, and they had no natural weapons except their brains and their hands. But humans could run. Her ancestors had hunted on the plains of Africa by chasing their prey for hours or days at a time, following the tracks of wounded animals until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. And this gift of endurance had been passed down through 100,000 generations, until it reached Helena. She was not going to outfight a Vordaki in a contest of strength, but she might be able to outlast one. The weeks turned into months, and Elena watched Krathful carefully during every training session, memorizing his habits and his patterns and the small mistakes he made when he thought no one was paying attention. His lower left arm was slightly slower than the others, probably an old injury that had healed imperfectly, and he always led with his upper right claw when attacking, which left his left side exposed for a fraction of a second. He breathed through vents on his neck that flared when he was tired, and those vents closed partially when he overheated, which suggested his species had difficulty regulating their body temperature during extended activity. He was also arrogant. He never studied his opponents before a match, because he assumed his natural advantages would be enough. And he never trained his endurance because the Vordaki philosophy said that any fight lasting more than 2 minutes was a failure. Elena filed away every observation and waited for the opportunity she knew would come. That opportunity arrived on a cold morning when the combat assignment list appeared on the barracks notice board, and Elena saw her name paired with his SSMNT trial about 47. Cadet Krath UL Vordaki vs. Cadet Elena Vasquez Human. Arena 3, 14000 show yours. The crowd of cadets around the board went silent when they saw the matchup, and Elena felt dozens of alien eyes turned toward her with expressions of pity or amusement or boda. Ketvari cadet she had spoken to a few times stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You can forfeit," he said quietly. "There is no shame in refusing a bout you cannot win." And Krathval has never lost a sanctioned match in his entire time at the academy. Elena looked at the name on the board and felt something cold and calm settle into her chest. "I know," she said. "He will hurt you badly," the Cathari continued. "The instructors are supposed to stop the fights before serious injury occurs, but they often intervene too slowly when the winner is obvious. And accidents happen in the arena that the medical staff cannot always repair." "I know," Elena said again. The Cathari shook his head with what might have been sadness. "You humans are strange creatures," he said. "I cannot tell if your courage comes from bravery or simply from not understanding how much danger you are in." Elena turned away from the board and walked toward the training hall where she would spend the next 6 hours preparing for the most important fight of her life. She understood the danger perfectly. She also understood something that Krathful and the other cadets, and even the instructors, had failed to realize about her. Species humans did not survive for 300,000 years by running away from predators bigger than themselves. They survived by learning how to kill them. Arena 3 could hold 3,000 spectators, and on the afternoon of the assessment trial, nearly every seat was filled with cadets and instructors and staff members who had heard rumors about the unusual matchup. Elena stood in the preparation room beneath the arena floor and listened to the crowd noise above her, a deep rumbling sound like an ocean made of voices, and she stretched her muscles slowly while reviewing everything she had learned about Vordaki combat techniques. The door opened and Instructor Morath entered, his insect-like body clicking against the metal floor as he approached her. "Cadet Vasquez," he said through his translator, "you are aware that you may forfeit this bout at any time before or during the match without penalty to your academic standing." "I am aware," Elena said. "You are also aware that Cadet Krathval has achieved 17 consecutive victories in sanctioned combat, including 3 against opponents who required extended medical treatment afterward." "I am aware of that as well." Morath's compound eyes studied her with an expression she could not interpret. "The medical team has been briefed on human anatomy," he said. "They believe they can stabilize most injuries you might sustain, though they cannot guarantee full recovery of all functions." Elena finished her stretches and stood up straight. "Thank you for the information." "Instructor," Morath made a sound that might have been frustration or might have been something else entirely. "I do not understand your species," he said. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no special abilities that would give you any advantage in combat against a Voldaki warrior. And yet you refuse to withdraw from a fight you cannot possibly win." "With respect, Instructor," Elena said, "you do not know what I can or cannot do." She walked past him toward the arena entrance before he could respond. The light was blinding when she stepped onto the sand floor of Arena 3, and the crowd noise swelled into something enormous that pressed against her from all sides. But Elena kept her eyes focused on the figure waiting at the other end of the circular space. Krathful stood in the center of the arena with all four arms raised in triumph, his scales gleaming under the artificial sun that hung above the combat zone. And the crowd roared its approval for the champion. They expected to see add another victory to his record. Elena walked toward him without hurrying, and she noticed the way the cheering faded into confused murmurs as the spectators got their first clear look at the size difference. Between the two fighters, Krathful was nearly 3 meters tall and weighed at least 4 times what she did, and his body was covered in natural armor that could stop projectile weapons, and his claws had been sharpened until they could cut through metal. Elena was small and soft and human. She could see the amusement on his face as she approached, the absolute certainty that this would be over in seconds. And she used that time to study his stance one more time. Lower left arm hanging slightly lower than the others. Weight shifted forward onto his front feet. Ready to charge, breathing vents on his neck fully open, indicating low exertion and high confidence. Instructor Morath climbed onto the raised platform at the edge of the arena and activated his amplification device. "This is Assessment Trial Bout 47. His voice echoed through the space. "The rules are as follows. The match continues until one combatant is incapacitated or yields. Lethal force is prohibited, and the instructor may halt the bout at any time if he determines that continued fighting poses unacceptable risk to either participant." He paused and looked at both fighters. "Do both combatants understand and accept these rules?" "I accept," Krathful said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "I accept." Elena said quietly. Morath raised one of his upper limbs. "Begin," the tone sounded. And Krathful charged. He moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move, crossing the distance between them in less than 2 seconds. And his primary arms swept toward Elena in a pincer strike that would have cut her in half if both claws had connected. But Elena was no longer standing where she had been. She had read his movement before he completed it, watching the shift of his weight and the tension in his muscles and the direction of his eyes. And she had stepped to the side at the exact moment his attack committed him to a single path. His claws cut through empty air, and the crowd went silent. Krathful spun around with a snarl of surprise, and Elena was already moving again, circling to his left side, where his weak arm would have trouble tracking her. "Stand still," he growled. "No," Elena said. He attacked again, faster this time, more furious, and once again Elena moved before his strikes could land, using the gaps between his forearms to slip past the killing zone and stay close enough that his size worked against him rather than for him. She did not try to hit him. She did not try to block or counter or engage in any way that would let him use his strength against her. She simply refused to be where his attacks were aimed. The crowd began to murmur, then to whisper, then to talk openly as the impossible continued happening in front of their eyes. 1 minute passed. then 2, then 3, and somewhere around the 4th minute, Elena noticed that the vents on Krathvoll's neck were starting to close. The 5th minute of the fight arrived, and Krathvoll was no longer moving like a champion. His strikes came slower now, his footwork grew sloppy, and his breathing had become a harsh, ragged sound that echoed across the silent arena. And Elena watched his body. Temperature climbed toward dangerous levels as he's overworked. Muscles produced heat faster than his biology could release it. The Vordaki were ambush predators. Their ancestors had hunted by hiding in shadows and striking once with overwhelming force, killing their prey before it even knew danger was present. And millions of years of evolution had shaped their bodies for explosive power rather than sustained effort. 5 minutes of continuous combat was longer than any Vordaki had evolved to fight. Elena kept moving her own lungs, burned, and her legs ached, and sweat poured down her face. But she had trained for this, running through the maintenance corridors every morning until her body remembered what her ancestors had always known: humans were built to keep going when other creatures stopped. "What are you doing?" Krathvoll gasped between attacks. "Why will you not fight properly?" "I am fighting properly," Elena said. "You just do not recognize what you are seeing." She circled to his left again, and his weak arm swept toward her a full half-second slower than it had at the start of the match. And she stepped past it without effort. The crowd had stopped murmuring. 3,000 spectators sat in complete silence as they watched something they had never seen before. A human female slowly and systematically exhausting a warrior from one of the most feared combat species in the galaxy. Instructor Morath stood frozen on his platform with his compound eyes fixed on the fight below. And Elena wondered if he was considering stopping the match, but stopping it would mean admitting that the human had outmaneuvered the Vordaki, and she suspected that was not something anyone in this arena was ready to accept. Not yet 6 minutes. Past 7 minutes. Krathvoll's scales had flushed a dark purple color that Elena recognized from her research as a sign of severe thermal stress, and his forearms hung heavy at his sides between increasingly desperate attacks. Was dying in front of them, not from any wound she had inflicted, but from his own body consuming itself in a fight it had never been designed to sustain. Elena felt something strange in her chest as she watched him struggle. Something that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction or might have been both at the same time. She had not asked for this fight. She had not asked to be bullied and harassed and treated like prey for months while instructors looked the other way and other cadets pretended not to see. But she was going to finish it. "Yield," she said, stopping her constant movement for the first time since the match began. "You cannot continue, and we both know it." Krathvoll stared at her with eyes that burned with hatred and humiliation, and something that looked almost like fear. "A Vordaki does not yield to prey," he snarled. "Then you will fall," Elena said simply. He roared and threw himself at her with everything he had left. A final desperate attack that put all forearms into a single crushing strike, aimed at where she stood. Elena had been waiting for this moment. She stepped inside his reach, closer than she had been during the entire fight, and seized his primary right wrist with both hands before he could react. Then she twisted her entire body weight against his elbow joint in a direction it was never meant to bend. The snap was loud enough to hear in the highest seats of the arena. Krathvoll screamed, a sound of pure animal agony that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. And she released his broken arm and struck twice more before he could recover. The first strike hit his throat, targeting the nerve cluster that controlled his breathing vents and sending his respiratory system into spasm. The second strike hit the soft spot beneath his jaw, where a major blood vessel passed close to the surface. and the impact triggered something humans called a carotid sinus reflex that would shut down his consciousness within seconds. Krathvel collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, his massive body crashing to the sand floor of the arena. And he did not get up. Elena stood over him, breathing hard but controlled, and looked up at Instructor Morath on his platform. The insect-like alien was staring at her with an expression. She could finally read it was fear. His whistle came a full 3 seconds after Krathvel hit the ground, far too late to stop anything that had already happened, and the medical teams rushed onto the sand to tend to the fallen Vortiki while the crowd remained frozen in their seats. Elena had not just won, she had dismantled a champion in front of everyone who had ever believed humans were weak, and somewhere in that silent arena, she knew that everything was about to change. The medical team worked on Krathvel for several minutes while Elena stood alone in the center of the arena, and the silence that hung over the crowd was heavier than any noise she had ever heard. His arm was broken in 3 places, his jaw was dislocated, and something in his nervous system had been disrupted badly enough that he could not regain consciousness despite the medications the doctors were pumping into his body. Elena watched them carry him away on a hovering stretcher and felt nothing but a calm emptiness where she had expected to feel triumph. She had won, but she had not enjoyed it. She had simply done what needed to be done. The crowd began to stir as the medical team disappeared through the arena exit, and Elena became aware of thousands of alien eyes turning toward her with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to something that looked almost like reverence. She was still trying to process what had happened when a figure descended from the observation platform and walked across the sand toward her. Commander Vexrel was the highest-ranking officer at the Academy, a member of a species called the Compound, who had served in more battles than Elena had years of life, and his approach caused the crowd noise to fade back into silence. He stopped 3 meters away and studied her with compound eyes that reflected the arena, lights like dark mirrors. "Cadet Vasquez," he said, his voice amplified so the entire arena could hear. "Explain your combat methodology." Elena straightened her spine and met his gaze without flinching. "Sir," she said, "humans are not fast or strong or armored, and we have no natural weapons that can compete with most species in direct combat. But we have 2 advantages that we have refined over 300,000 years of survival." She paused to catch her breath. "The first advantage is endurance, because humans evolved as persistence hunters who chase prey for hours or days until that prey collapsed from exhaustion. And we can sustain physical activity longer than almost any species in the known galaxy." Commander Vexrol's head tilted slightly, a gesture she did not know how to interpret. "The second advantage is our ability to learn," Elena continued. "Humans study our enemies, we identify their weaknesses, and we develop strategies to exploit those weaknesses regardless of how superior those enemies might appear." She looked around the arena at the thousands of faces watching her. "My species nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times because we were too efficient at violence against each other. And we invented weapons of mass destruction before we learned how to live in peace. And we spent most of our history finding new ways to kill things that were bigger and stronger and more dangerous than we were." Her voice grew stronger. "We domesticated wolves because we thought apex predators would make useful companions. And we hunted mammoths with pointed sticks, and we conquered every environment on our planet from frozen wastelands to burning deserts, because we refused to accept that anything was impossible." She looked down at the spot where Krathvel had fallen. "Cadet Krathvel assumed I was prey because I am small and soft and because my species is new to the galactic community. But he was wrong, because humans have not been prey for a very long time." Commander Vexrol was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head in a gesture that Elena had read about but never expected to see directed at her. "The Timaeus highest mark of respect that his species offered to those they considered worthy. "Cadet Vasquez," he said, "report to the Advanced Combat Division at 0600 tomorrow morning, because you will be teaching a seminar on human military doctrine to selected senior cadets." A ripple went through the crowd. Additionally, the commander continued, "I will be recommending to the Academy Board that human combat techniques be added to the standard curriculum for all students, because I believe we have been operating under some seriously mistaken assumptions about your species." He turned, addressed the entire arena. "Let this match serve as a reminder to all cadets that strength and size and natural weapons are not the only paths to victory, and that underestimating an opponent based on appearance is a mistake that can cost you everything." Elena walked out of arena 3 to a silence that slowly transformed into whispers and then into something louder, and she passed groups of cadets who stepped aside to let her through with expressions of wonder and fear near the exit. She noticed the Kethari cadet who had warned her to forfeit, and he was standing with a methane breather, whose species she recognized from the registration desk on her first day. "The instructors told us humans were admitted as a political courtesy," the Kethari was saying quietly, a gesture to make the new species feel included. The methane breather made a bubbling sound that might have been laughter. "My species fought 3 wars against the humans before they joined the compact," it said. "We lost all 3, and now I understand why our elders refused to talk about those defeats." It turned its tank to watch Elena walk past. The instructors were not paying attention. It continued, "But I suspect they will be paying attention now." Elena returned to her barracks and sat down on her bunk and looked out the window at the stars that had seemed so intimidating when she first arrived. She thought about her grandmother and the stories about survival and determination and the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. She thought about all the cadets who had laughed at her, and all the instructors who had dismissed her, and all the aliens who had called her species weak and soft, and unworthy of respect. Tomorrow she would begin teaching them what humans really were. Tomorrow the galaxy would start to understand why her species had clawed its way from caves to starships in the blink of an evolutionary eye. But tonight, Elena allowed herself a small smile. She had come to the academy to prove that humans belonged among the stars, and she had done exactly that